I used to believe my story was simple. A long relationship, a powerful family, a wedding everyone admired. That belief died the night before I was supposed to say, I do. My name is Sophia Grant, and for 3 years I was engaged to Harrison Montgomery. To the world, he was impressive, successful, confident, born into a family whose name opened doors without effort. To me, he was the man who held my hand through crowded rooms, who spoke about the future like it was already written, who promised safety, loyalty, and love. Or at least, that's what I thought. Our wedding was meant to be the event of the year, 200 guests, a historic church. Press quietly invited under the excuse of society coverage. Harrison's mother, Diana, treated me like a daughter. His sister, Claire, called me the sister she never had. Every detail had been planned months in advance, polished until nothing looked out of place. Nothing ever does when someone is hiding the truth well. The night before the wedding, Harrison stayed at the Grand Hotel for his bachelor party. It was tradition, Diana said, one last celebration before responsibility. I hadn't planned to go anywhere near that place, but plans change for small, careless reasons. In my case, it was a pair of cufflinks, Harrison's grandfather's, forgotten on the dresser. Diana had insisted he wear them at the ceremony. I told myself I'd just drop them off. 5 minutes, no interruptions. The hotel staff knew me. They always did. I didn't sign in, didn't announce myself. I was directed toward a private lounge on the top floor, laughter echoing down the corridor before I even reached the door. That was the first crack in the story I thought I was living. Harrison's voice stood out instantly. Relaxed, amused, not the nervous groom everyone expected him to be the night before his wedding. I slowed my steps without knowing why. The door was slightly open. I could see shadows moving inside, glasses clinking, bodies leaning back in comfort. Then I heard my name. Not spoken with affection, not with love, spoken like a decision already made. I stood there, cufflinks clenched in my hand, listening as the man I was about to marry spoke freely, confident that the woman he was discussing would never hear him. That was the moment my life split in two. The version of me who walked into that hotel believing in a future with Harrison Montgomery didn't walk back out. Someone else did. I should have walked away the moment I heard my name. Any sensible person would have. Instead, I stayed still, pressed slightly into the shadow of the corridor, close enough to hear every word clearly. One of his friends laughed. You're really going through with it tomorrow. Harrison answered without hesitation. Of course, everything's lined up. Another voice followed. Blake, his closest friend. You mean the money's lined up? That made the room erupt again. Harrison didn't deny it. Sophia's perfect on paper. Her trust fund alone makes this marriage worth it. Add her connections, and Montgomery Enterprises doubles in reach within a year. Someone whistled. Cold. Realistic, Harrison corrected. She's completely devoted. That's the best part. My fingers tightened around the velvet box. Blake leaned in closer, his voice lower but still clear. And after? There was a pause, just long enough to matter. She's temporary, Harrison said, calm, certain. Until someone better comes along, someone more suitable long-term. The words settled heavily in the air. No one objected. No one questioned him. They laughed like he'd just told a clever joke. In that moment, memories rewired themselves. Late nights he called business emergencies. Trips canceled at the last minute. The way decisions always seemed to benefit him more than me. I had excused everything, trusted without question. Inside the lounge, someone raised a glass. To smart investments. Harrison laughed again, that same laugh he used with me, the one I thought meant comfort. I stepped back before anyone could see me. The corridor felt longer than it had moments earlier. My heartbeat was steady, not frantic. Shock had turned into something colder. I didn't confront him, I didn't cry, I didn't drop the cufflinks or make a sound. I left. Back in our penthouse, I placed the velvet box on the table and stared at it for a long time. 3 years reduced to a sentence spoken too carelessly to be hidden. I opened my laptop. As Harrison's fiancée, I had access to things most people didn't. Shared accounts, shared files, shared passwords he never thought to change. He trusted me completely. That was his mistake. Emails came first. Business threads that didn't align. transfers that moved too smoothly, conversations that stopped abruptly when certain names appeared. Then I found her. Rebecca Matthews. Board member, investor, the same woman Harrison claimed was difficult but necessary. The same woman who would be sitting among our guests the next morning. Their emails weren't careful, they didn't need to be. They spoke of plans already agreed upon, of money redirected, of timing, of me. She suspects nothing, one message read. Another followed hours later. After the wedding, we moved forward. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes. By dawn, I understood something clearly. Harrison didn't just lie to me. He built his entire life on lies, and I was standing at the center of it. The wedding was still hours away. And I had a decision to make. I didn't sleep. I watched the city shift from night to morning while files downloaded quietly onto my laptop. Harrison always said transparency mattered in business. He just never expected me to look closely. Accounts led to other accounts. Transactions routed through shell companies, dates that aligned too perfectly with our engagement milestones. Each discovery tightened the same conclusion. The wedding wasn't a beginning, it was a trigger. Near dawn, my phone buzzed. Harrison, big day today. Wish you were here last night. I didn't reply. Another message followed minutes later. Harrison, I love you. I stared at the screen, then turned the phone face down. By 7, everything was in place. Screenshots, copies, backups stored in 3 separate locations. I emailed a folder to a private investigator I'd contacted hours earlier using a name Harrison didn't know. I didn't explain much. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke clearly. At 9, the wedding planner called. Good morning, Sophia. Hair and makeup will be ready in 20 minutes. Perfect, I said. My voice didn't shake. At 10, Diana arrived at the suite, glowing with excitement. She hugged me, told me how proud she was, how lucky Harrison was. I smiled when expected, nodded when appropriate. I listened without absorbing anything. Claire followed, buzzing with energy, talking about the ceremony, the guests, the future. She adjusted my veil like she always had, gentle and trusting. I wondered how many people in that room would feel betrayed before the day ended. At 11:43, my phone vibrated again. Unknown number confirmed, offshore accounts verified, press is ready, authorities notified. I locked the phone and slipped it into the hidden pocket sewn into my dress the night before. I'd planned that detail months ago, thinking I'd need tissues. Instead, I needed proof. The envelope lay beneath the makeup table, cream-colored, unmarked, heavy with copies that would not stay private much longer. The music from the church filtered through the walls as guests arrived. Everyone was in position. So was I. When the coordinator knocked, I took one last look at myself in the mirror, not searching for reassurance, not checking for doubt. There was none. The doors would open in minutes. Harrison would be waiting, smiling, certain of the outcome. He believed the ceremony was a formality. He believed the story was already written. He was wrong. I picked up the bouquet, slid the envelope into place, straightened my shoulders. This wasn't a walk toward marriage. It was a walk toward exposure. And I was ready. The doors opened. The music began, steady and familiar, but it meant nothing to me anymore. Every step forward was measured, deliberate. Faces blurred into a single mass of expectation. No one suspected a thing. Harrison stood at the altar, confident, relaxed, smiling like a man who believed the world was still under his control. When he saw me, his smile widened. He mouthed the words, "You're beautiful." I didn't respond. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed Blake in the front row. His posture stiffened when our eyes met, just for a second. Long enough to confirm he remembered the words spoken the night before. Rebecca sat 2 seats away from him. Calm, composed, she didn't look at me, she didn't need to, she already believed she'd won. I reached the altar. Harrison reached for my hand. I stepped slightly to the side. The movement was small, but it was enough. The priest paused, confused. Harrison's smile faltered for the first time. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Sophia." I turned, not toward him, but toward the guests. 200 people fell silent. "Before we begin," I said, "there are things that need to be heard." Harrison laughed softly, trying to recover. This isn't funny. I know, I replied. I took the envelope from my dress and broke the seal. The first page slid free. These are emails, I said calmly, sent by Harrison Montgomery during our engagement. A ripple moved through the church. Harrison reached for the papers. I stepped back. I read the first line out loud. Once the wedding secures access to her trust fund, we proceed as planned. Gasps followed, chairs shifted, someone whispered my name. Rebecca finally looked up. Her face had lost its color. Harrison shook his head. This is out of context. I pulled out another page. She's temporary, until someone better comes along. That one landed harder. Blake looked at the floor. Diana stood. Harrison, she said, her voice breaking, what is this? I didn't stop. There are also records of diverted company funds, offshore accounts, and internal communications detailing fraud within Montgomery Enterprises. The church doors opened. 2 suited agents stepped inside. That was when Harrison grabbed my arm. You're destroying everything, he hissed. I pulled free. You did that, I said quietly. The agents approached the altar. The priest stepped aside. Phones were already raised. Cameras clicked. Rebecca stood abruptly and tried to leave. One agent blocked her path. Harrison's voice cracked. Sophia, please, we can fix this. I looked at him then, really looked. There was never anything to fix, I said. There was only the truth. The agents took his arm. The room erupted into chaos. And I stood perfectly still, watching the man who thought he owned my future lose control of the present. The moment the agents touched Harrison, everything fractured. Voices rose at once. Guests stood, some stepping back, others moving closer. Phones were lifted openly now. There was no pretending this was private anymore. Harrison twisted toward me, panic breaking through his control. You planned this. Yes, I said. That single word ended whatever hope he still held. An agent read his name aloud. Another listed charges: fraud, embezzlement, financial manipulation. Each word stripped another layer from the man everyone admired. Diana moved forward, her face drained of color. Tell me this isn't true. Harrison didn't answer her. He couldn't. Silence was the only thing left. Rebecca tried to speak. This is a misunderstanding. One agent turned toward her. You'll have a chance to explain. She stopped talking. The priest had stepped away completely. The altar was no longer a place of vows. It was a place of evidence. Harrison looked at me again, desperation replacing anger. You loved me. I loved who you pretended to be, I replied. That hurt him more than anything else I'd said. Blake stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. He didn't look at anyone as he moved toward the aisle. No one stopped him. He was already finished. The agents tightened their grip on Harrison. Cameras flashed faster. Someone asked a question loudly, then another. The words blended into noise. Harrison leaned close as they pulled him away. You didn't have to do it like this. I met his eyes. Yes, I did. They turned him toward the exit. Rebecca was escorted out through a side door. She never looked back. Diana sank into a chair, her hands trembling. Claire stood beside her, stunned, unable to move. I didn't go to them, not yet. I turned and walked down the aisle alone. The same aisle I'd walked minutes earlier believing I was about to be someone's wife. Now I was something else entirely. Outside, the doors opened to a wall of sound. Reporters, cameras, questions shouted without pause. I stepped into the light without stopping. One voice cut through the rest. Sophia, did you know about the fraud before today? Yes, I said. Was this planned? Yes. Why do it at the wedding? I stopped walking. Because lies end where truth is public, I said. Then I kept moving. Behind me, sirens started. Harrison's name echoed through the crowd. Inside the church, the wedding was already being described in past tense. By the time I reached the car waiting at the curb, the story was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone. And there was no going back. The city didn't slow down for what had happened inside that church. Traffic moved. People walked past. Only my phone told the story changing by the second. By the time I reached my apartment, the first headlines were already live. Harrison's name appeared beside words he had spent his life avoiding. Fraud, investigation, arrest. I locked the door and stood still. Messages flooded in. Unknown numbers, media requests. Friends who had attended the ceremony asking what was real and what wasn't. I didn't answer any of them. At noon, my private investigator called. "They're holding him," he said. "Formal charges by evening. Rebecca Matthews is cooperating. She didn't expect you to move first." I thanked him and ended the call. An hour later, Diana arrived. She didn't knock, she still had the spare key. She looked smaller than she had that morning. Older, like the truth had aged her in minutes. She didn't accuse me, she didn't raise her voice. She sat. "Was any of it real?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "just not the parts that mattered." She nodded slowly, absorbing that. "They're saying this goes back years." "It does." Her hands folded together. "I raised him better than this." I didn't argue. Claire called later, her voice broke when she spoke. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." "I know," I said. That was the end of the conversation. By evening, the arrest became official. Rebecca's name followed Harrison's in every report. Montgomery Enterprises' stock dropped before markets even opened. Partners began distancing themselves publicly. At 9, Harrison called from a restricted number. I let it ring. He called again. I answered the third time. "You ruined my life," he said. "You used mine," I replied. Silence followed, then his voice changed, lower, controlled. "You think this ends with me?" "It already has," I said. I hung up. Later that night, a notification appeared from an unfamiliar email address. Attached was a single file, internal board communications, documents I hadn't even found. Rebecca had sent them. The message was short. "You were right to act first." I forwarded everything to the investigator without responding. Just before midnight, another message arrived, this one from the press. "Is it true the wedding was never meant to happen?" I stared at the screen. The wedding had happened. Just not the way anyone expected. And the fallout had only just begun. Morning arrived without warning. Every major outlet carried the story. Different headlines, same conclusion. The wedding had been a trap, and Harrison had walked into it willingly. Analysts debated timelines. Lawyers speculated outcomes. Everyone had an opinion. None of them mattered. What mattered was what came next. At 10, Montgomery Enterprises issued a statement. Short, defensive, temporary leadership announced. Harrison's name removed from all active roles. It was meant to stop the bleeding. It didn't. By noon, 2 board members resigned. By 2, 3 major clients suspended contracts. By 4, the authorities expanded the investigation. I didn't leave my apartment. At 5, my investigator called again. "They're digging deeper. This isn't just Harrison anymore." "Good," I said. "His father's records are being reviewed. Old shell companies, old favors." I closed my eyes. Then this was always bigger than us. "Yes." After the call, I opened my email. Dozens of messages sat unread. Among them was one from Harrison's legal team, carefully worded, threatening without sounding like it. I deleted it. Another email followed, this one from an unfamiliar address. "You destroyed the wrong people." No signature, no context. I forwarded it and flagged it. At 7, Diana called. "They took him away tonight," she said quietly. "Formal detention." I let the silence stretch. "He asked for you," she added. "I won't go," I said. "I didn't think you would." Her voice cracked. "I don't recognize him anymore." "I stopped recognizing him before you did." She exhaled slowly. "What happens now?" "That's not up to me." After the call ended, I stood by the window, watching the city glow. Somewhere across town, Harrison was sitting in a room where confidence didn't matter. Somewhere else, Rebecca was negotiating survival. And somewhere closer than either of them, people were looking at their own records, their own secrets, wondering if they were next. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed again. "Unknown number, you think you won." I typed one reply. I already did. Then I turned the phone off. Because whatever was coming next wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about how many truths were still buried. And who else would fall when they surfaced? The next 48 hours moved faster than the 3 years I had spent with Harrison. Investigators called twice, both times with the same tone, calm, focused, certain. They didn't ask emotional questions. They asked for access, confirmations, timelines. I gave them everything: passwords, files, names. By the second night, Harrison's personal accounts were frozen. By the third morning, Montgomery Enterprises halted operations entirely. That was when the calls changed. Former allies turned cautious. Associates who once praised Harrison's leadership now spoke carefully, distancing themselves sentence by sentence. Each conversation sounded rehearsed. At noon, my investigator sent one line. "Rebecca is negotiating a deal." I wasn't surprised. An hour later, another message followed. "She's naming names." That was when the pressure began to shift. A corporate attorney I didn't recognize requested a meeting. I declined. Another followed, then a third. All claimed neutrality. None of them were. By evening, an unmarked envelope was slipped under my door. Inside was a printed document, a settlement proposal. Silence exchanged for compensation. A generous amount, enough to make headlines disappear. I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "This doesn't have to continue," a man said. His voice was measured. "You've made your point." "I haven't finished," I replied. A pause. "You're exposing people who will fight back. Then they should have behaved better." The call ended without another word. That night, news broke that additional warrants had been issued. A former executive was taken in for questioning. A subsidiary office was raided before sunrise. Harrison's attorney released a statement blaming internal mismanagement. Rebecca's lawyer released none. At dawn, Diana sent a message. "They're saying he might cooperate." I stared at the words. If Harrison talked, the story wouldn't shrink. It would expand. At 9, the investigator confirmed it. "He's offering information in exchange for reduced sentencing. And the information is real." I sat back, breathing slowly. Harrison had always believed control came from knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Now silence had become dangerous. At 11, another message arrived. This one from Harrison himself, not a call, a text. "You wanted the truth. Be careful what you unleash." I didn't reply. Because the truth was already moving. And it didn't need my permission anymore. The investigation crossed a point of no return the moment Harrison agreed to talk. By midday, leaks began appearing, not official statements. Fragments, enough to signal that cooperation had started, enough to unsettle people who thought they were untouchable. My investigator sent a list of names. Some were familiar, others weren't. All of them had benefited. At the same time, the tone toward me shifted. Articles stopped calling me a bride. They called me a source, a catalyst, a risk. At 4 in the afternoon, a lawyer finally said what the others hadn't. "You're no longer protected by relevance," he warned over the phone. "You're protected by accuracy. One mistake changes everything." "I don't make mistakes," I replied. He didn't argue. That evening, security appeared outside my building without being requested. Not police, private, paid for by someone who didn't want attention. The message was clear. Things were no longer contained. At night, Harrison's second statement was released. He admitted partial responsibility. That phrase alone told me everything. Partial meant selective, partial meant calculated, partial meant he was still trying to control the narrative. Rebecca responded within hours. Her attorney confirmed full cooperation. That was the fracture. If she spoke freely and Harrison didn't, their stories would collide. And collisions reveal impact. At midnight, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. "You should have taken the settlement," Harrison said. "You should have told the truth sooner," I replied. "You don't understand what you've triggered." "I understand exactly," I said. "You're afraid." A pause, breathing, controlled but not steady. "They won't protect you forever," he said. I don't need protection, I answered. I already have distance. I ended the call. Minutes later, breaking news alerts lit the screen. A former Montgomery partner had been detained. Evidence seized. Accounts linked. The story was no longer about one groom. It was about a system. And systems collapse slower than people, but harder. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark. Not waiting. Listening. Because when powerful structures begin to fail, they make noise. And that sound had only just begun. The first arrest outside Harrison's circle happened just after dawn. A former financial director. Quiet, low profile, someone no one mentioned in interviews. By noon, his name was everywhere. By evening, he was cooperating. That was when the calls stopped pretending to be polite. My investigator warned me early. Someone is trying to find out how much you know. They're late, I said. He didn't laugh. At midday, a sealed document was unsealed, court-ordered. It confirmed what I already suspected. Harrison hadn't been the architect. He had been the operator. The design was older, deeper, protected by years of silence. That made him dangerous. At 3, Harrison's attorney requested a private meeting. Not through Diana, not through the court, direct. I declined. An hour later, the request became a message. He's willing to correct the record. That phrasing mattered. Correction meant revision. Revision meant survival. At 6, Rebecca's testimony leaked. Not the full statement, enough to show contradiction. Her version placed Harrison at the center. His version placed responsibility elsewhere. Only one of them could be believed. At 8, Diana called. They moved him, she said, different facility. For safety. Yes. I closed my eyes. Cooperation had consequences. He keeps asking if you've spoken, she added. I haven't, I said. I know. Her voice lowered. He's scared. So is everyone else, I replied. After the call, I opened the files again, read them in order, not searching for emotion, searching for leverage. Timelines don't lie, numbers don't forget. At midnight, a notification appeared. Emergency hearing scheduled. The case was accelerating. Then my phone rang again. Blocked number. I answered. You wanted exposure, Harrison said. His voice was flat. You're about to get it. For who? I asked. For everyone, he replied. The line went dead. Minutes later, my investigator sent a final message for the night. He's giving them something big tomorrow. I stared at the screen. Whatever Harrison planned to reveal wouldn't save him. But it might burn everything around him. And I knew one thing with certainty. The next day would not end quietly. The morning began with silence. No alerts, no calls, no leaks. That was how I knew something was coming. At 9:17 a.m., the emergency hearing began behind closed doors. By 9:42, a single sentence appeared on a legal tracker. Additional parties under investigation. Names were sealed, but the reaction was immediate. Stocks dipped across unrelated firms, law offices went dark, phones stopped ringing. At 10, my investigator called. He talked, he said, not the way anyone expected. What did he give them? Proof, originals, not copies. I sat still. He didn't trade names, the investigator continued. He traded structure, how the system worked, who protected it, how money moved without signatures. That changed everything. By 11, 3 executives resigned publicly. Not from Montgomery Enterprises, from companies that had never been mentioned before. At noon, a sealed indictment leaked. Rebecca was named as a cooperating witness. Harrison was named as a central figure. Others were unnamed but clearly outlined. The pattern was visible now. At 1, the press shifted tone again. Not scandal, not betrayal. Collapse. At 2, Diana arrived unannounced. They're saying this will reach international accounts, she said. Foreign entities. It was never local, I replied. She nodded once. He called me this morning. And he said you always knew who he was. I didn't answer. At 3, subpoenas were issued. At 4, federal agents entered 2 financial firms simultaneously. At 5, the courthouse steps filled with cameras. At 6, my phone rang. "Harrison." I answered. "You didn't expect this," he said. "I expected you to protect yourself," I replied. "That's all you've ever done." This time I told the truth. "You told enough to survive," I said. "There's a difference." Silence followed. "They'll come for you too," he said finally. "They already did," I replied, "and they left." The line disconnected. At 8, official confirmation arrived. A multi-agency task force had taken control. The scope was no longer negotiable. This was no longer about a wedding. It was about how deep the lie went. And who would still be standing when it ended. The charges were announced before the city fully woke up. Multiple indictments, financial crimes spanning years, coordinated fraud across entities that had never publicly acknowledged each other. Harrison's name appeared at the center of every document. By mid-morning, the trial date was set. Fast-tracked. That alone confirmed how serious it had become. I was listed as a primary witness. I expected that. What I didn't expect was the timing. At 11, my investigator sent a single message. Defense strategy leaked. Attached was a summary, short, precise, predictable. They planned to frame me as emotional, calculated but unstable, a woman motivated by betrayal rather than evidence. I forwarded it to the prosecution without comment. At noon, Harrison was brought into court for the preliminary hearing. Cameras captured only seconds. His expression was controlled. His posture deliberate. He still believed presentation mattered. Rebecca entered separately. She didn't look at him. Inside the courtroom, the judge outlined the scope. No delays, no sealed negotiations, public proceedings. That was when Harrison's lawyer requested a recess. Denied. The prosecution began immediately. Documents appeared on screens, timelines aligned, transfers traced, messages read aloud, not opinions, records. Harrison's attorney objected twice. Both were overruled. At 3, my phone buzzed. "Diana, he keeps looking for you." I didn't respond. At 4, the judge addressed Harrison directly. "You are advised that any further cooperation must be complete." Harrison nodded once. That nod mattered. It meant he was choosing survival again. At 5, the hearing adjourned. Outside, reporters crowded the steps. Questions were shouted, no answers were given. Inside, Harrison was escorted back into custody. As he passed, his eyes met mine. For the first time, there was no calculation there. Only recognition. That night, the prosecution called me. "They're going to push hard tomorrow," the lead attorney said. "He's shifting blame, subtle but clear." "Let him," I replied. "He's trying to reframe the beginning." "That's impossible," I said. "The beginning was recorded." Silence followed. "That's exactly what we needed to hear," she said. When the call ended, I reviewed the timeline again. Every step, every decision, every word spoken the night before the wedding. Because tomorrow, the truth wouldn't just be revealed. It would be tested. And Harrison had already started losing. The courtroom was full before the judge entered. No movement, no noise, every seat occupied by people waiting for something to break. Harrison was brought in first. He sat straight, hands folded, eyes forward. Rebecca entered moments later and took her place without looking at him. The separation was deliberate. The prosecution called its first witness. Not me. An analyst. Charts appeared, numbers aligned, accounts overlapped. The structure Harrison had explained in private now existed in public. Every explanation he had once given to justify delays and transfers was reduced to evidence. Harrison's attorney objected again. Denied. By noon, the court understood one thing clearly. This was not confusion, it was design. After lunch, Rebecca was called. She stood, sworn in, and spoke without hesitation. She didn't dramatize, she didn't explain motivations. She stated actions, dates, instructions, names. When she mentioned the wedding, the room shifted. "Yes," she said, "the marriage was part of the plan." Harrison didn't react. Then she said my name. That was when he moved. Not much, just enough to show strain. Rebecca described conversations that mirrored the words I had overheard. Temporary, access, timing, control. She repeated them as facts, not insults. The defense tried to interrupt. The judge stopped them. At 3, the prosecution called me. I stood, took the oath, sat. I didn't look at Harrison. I spoke in sequence, not emotion, not interpretation, only what I heard, only what I saw, only what I verified. The night, the words, the files, the confirmation. When the defense questioned me, they tried to shift tone. Were you angry? Yes. Were you hurt? Yes. Did that influence your actions? No, I replied, the evidence did. They pressed harder. You chose the wedding to expose him. Yes. To humiliate him. No, I said, to prevent him from denying it. That ended the line of questioning. At 5, the judge adjourned for the day. As I stood to leave, Harrison finally looked at me. Not with anger. With calculation failing. Outside, cameras waited. I didn't stop. Inside the courtroom, something had changed. The story was no longer his to shape. And tomorrow, the verdict would begin forming without him. The second day of trial didn't start with testimony. It started with emotion. Harrison's legal team requested a closed session, national security, international exposure. The judge denied it within seconds. Whatever protection Harrison believed still existed was gone. The prosecution adjusted strategy immediately. They stopped explaining. They started connecting. A former compliance officer testified next. He spoke about instructions that bypassed protocol, orders that arrived verbally, never written. Meetings that were never scheduled. Payments that appeared clean because they were never meant to be traced. He named Harrison. Then he named others. Each name tightened the room. By noon, the defense abandoned denial and pivoted. They acknowledged misconduct but minimized intent. Harrison was portrayed as a participant, not a leader. That argument collapsed when the next witness took the stand. A digital forensics expert. He displayed metadata, originals, deleted files recovered from backups Harrison believed were erased, messages time-stamped within minutes of conversations I had overheard. One message appeared on the screen. Make sure she signs before Friday. The date matched the wedding week. The defense didn't object. They couldn't. At 2, the judge requested clarification. Is the court to understand that the marriage was instrumental to the continuation of this operation? The prosecutor answered without hesitation. Yes. Harrison finally reacted. He leaned forward, whispered urgently to his attorney. His posture broke for the first time since proceedings began. At 3, a recess was called. In the hallway, I crossed paths with Rebecca. She stopped. You did exactly what I couldn't, she said. I didn't respond. At 4, court resumed. Harrison's attorney requested a plea discussion. The prosecution refused. At 5, the judge addressed the jury directly. You will consider intent, structure, and responsibility, not sympathy. Harrison lowered his head. When court adjourned, Diana approached me quietly. He never thought this would reach this point, she said. He planned for everything except truth, I replied. That night, a sealed document leaked. Sentencing ranges. They were severe. Harrison's calls stopped after that. No threats. No warnings. Just silence. And silence, this time, wasn't strategy. It was defeat taking shape. The third day began without Harrison's attorney. A replacement stood in his place. That alone told the court everything it needed to know. Negotiations had failed. The prosecution rested its case before noon. They didn't summarize, they didn't persuade, they simply ended. The defense had nothing left to introduce. No witnesses, no alternative timelines, no explanation that survived cross-checking. At 1, closing arguments began. The prosecution spoke briefly. They focused on control, on design, on intent proven by repetition, not accident. They ended with a single statement. This was not a crime of impulse, it was a crime of certainty. The defense spoke longer. They spoke about pressure, about expectations, about legacy. They avoided the word wedding entirely. The jury listened without reaction. At 3, deliberation began. Harrison was escorted out. He didn't look at anyone this time. At 5, the jury returned. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. The room held its breath. On the charge of financial fraud, guilty. No movement. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty. A murmur rippled, then died. On the charge of embezzlement, guilty. Harrison closed his eyes. On all remaining counts, guilty. The word settled like a final seal. The judge set sentencing for the following morning. No delays. No reconsideration. Harrison was led away without protest. Outside the courtroom, reporters surged. I didn't stop. That night, Diana called once. He asked me to tell you he understands now, she said. I know, I replied. At dawn, sentencing began. The judge listed aggravating factors: abuse of trust, scale, intent, impact. The sentence was read clearly. Lengthy. Final. Harrison stood motionless. When it was over, he turned once, searching. Our eyes met. There was nothing left to say. The door closed behind him. And with it, the version of the story he had controlled for years ended completely. What remained was aftermath. And that would be even harder to escape. The sentence didn't end the story. It redirected it. Within hours, companies began releasing statements distancing themselves from everything connected to Harrison. Partnerships dissolved quietly. Accounts were closed without explanation. People who once shared tables with him erased photographs, rewrote histories. Rebecca accepted a reduced sentence the same afternoon. Her cooperation was complete. Blake vanished. No public charge, no statement, just absence. His name stopped appearing in articles, then stopped being mentioned at all. Montgomery Enterprises entered receivership before the week ended. Assets frozen, offices sealed, records seized. The name that once carried weight now triggered audits. Diana resigned from every board she sat on, not publicly, not dramatically, one letter at a time. She stopped answering calls from people who wanted reassurance she could no longer give. Claire left the city. She didn't announce it, she didn't explain, she sent one message. I need distance. I understood. At night, I reviewed messages I hadn't opened. Threats that no longer mattered. Apologies that came too late. Requests framed as concern. I ignored them all. One message stood apart. Unknown sender, you ended more than one life. I read it once, then deleted it. Because what it ended was deception, not people. Days later, I received formal confirmation. All charges concluded. All testimony recorded. My involvement was officially complete. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something unfinished. The system had collapsed. But systems always leave fragments behind. And fragments don't disappear. They wait. The call came 2 weeks later. Not from investigators, not from lawyers. From a number I recognized, but hadn't seen since the trial ended. Harrison. I let it ring. It rang again. Then a message arrived. There's something you don't know, and it doesn't end with me. I stared at the screen, longer than I wanted to admit. The next morning, my investigator confirmed what the message suggested. One account was never fully traced, he said. It predates Harrison, it survived the freeze. Who controls it? That's the problem, no single name. That was new. Everything until now had led cleanly to Harrison or Rebecca. This didn't. The structure was older, layered, deliberately vague. Money moved through it slowly, carefully, like it was waiting rather than operating. At noon, I received an encrypted file. No sender. Inside were transaction logs I hadn't seen before. Dates years before my relationship with Harrison. Transfers tied to companies that still existed. Executives still active. At the bottom of the file was a note. He was never the top. I forwarded everything. Within hours, subpoenas were issued quietly. No press, no announcements. This time, discretion mattered. At night, Harrison called again. I answered. You found it, he said. Why didn't you tell them? I asked. They wouldn't have believed me then, he replied. They will now. You're still bargaining. Yes, he said, but not for myself. Silence stretched. They're watching you, he added, not to stop you, to measure you. Who? I asked. The ones who don't appear in courtrooms, he said, only after. The line went dead. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from fear. From clarity. Harrison had fallen. But something else had been exposed. And it hadn't reacted yet. That meant it was calculating. Which meant this was not over. The investigation restarted without a headline. That was intentional. No raids, no announcements, just subpoenas delivered quietly and meetings held behind closed doors. The kind of movement meant to avoid panic. My investigator warned me early. This isn't public justice. This is containment. Then it's bigger than we thought, I said. Yes. 2 days later, a familiar name resurfaced. Not in the news, in a sealed brief. Someone who had attended the wedding, someone who had applauded, someone who had never spoken. The connection was indirect but consistent. Money didn't flow from them. It flowed toward them. At noon, I was asked to testify again, not in court, in a secured room, no recording devices, no observers. They asked different questions this time. Not about Harrison. About influence. About introductions. About who stood behind him when decisions were made that never appeared on paper. I answered carefully. That evening, Harrison sent another message. They finally listened. I didn't respond. The next morning, a corporation announced an unexpected leadership change. No reason given. Stock stabilized within hours. The message was clear to those watching. At 3, my investigator called again. They've identified the pattern, he said. They won't call it criminal, they'll call it reform. People don't disappear quietly without protection, I replied. They're protected by necessity, he said. That night I received a final file, smaller than the others, more precise. Inside was a list of names. None of them were new. They were careful. They were patient. And they were still operating. At the bottom of the file was a single sentence. You were never meant to find this. I closed the laptop. Because whoever had written that was right. I wasn't meant to. But I had. And now they knew. The question wasn't whether they would act. It was how. Months passed without noise. That was the most dangerous part. Cases closed publicly. Sentences served. Headlines moved on. To anyone watching from the outside, the story had ended exactly where it was supposed to. But nothing truly ended. The sealed investigations continued quietly. Executives stepped down citing personal reasons. Mergers dissolved without explanation. Boards restructured overnight. The system adjusted itself without admitting it had ever been threatened. I changed nothing about my routine. That was deliberate. The investigator stayed in contact, less frequently now. When he did call, his updates were brief. They're dismantling without collapsing. Who? I asked. Everyone who understood the message. Harrison was transferred to a long-term facility. No interviews, no statements. His appeals stalled before they reached review. He had become irrelevant to the larger story. Rebecca disappeared into protective anonymity. Blake was never mentioned again. One afternoon, an unmarked envelope appeared at my office. No return address. Inside was a single document, a resignation letter, not signed, not dated. The position belonged to someone whose name I had seen on the list. Attached was a note. You were correct to speak when you did. No apology, no admission. Just acknowledgement. I burned it. That night, I received one last message from Harrison. You didn't destroy anything, you interrupted it. I stared at words. He was right. Destruction leaves ruins, interruption forces change. The difference mattered. The following week, the final sealed inquiry concluded. No arrests, no trials, Just policy shifts, quiet removals, and permanent barriers installed where access had once been easy. That was how systems survived exposure. By adapting, I archived the remaining files and locked them away. Not because I was afraid. Because leverage is strongest when unused. The story had moved beyond justice. It had entered memory. And memory has consequences. Even when no one speaks its name, the last confirmation arrived without ceremony. No call, no warning. Just a secure message marked closed. Every open thread tied off. Every inquiry sealed. Every name accounted for in the way powerful systems prefer, through removal, not exposure. That was the end. Not the kind people notice. Harrison never contacted me again. His name stopped appearing in records that mattered. He became a reference point in files, not a presence. That was his final punishment. The wedding footage circulated for years. Paused, replayed, studied. People argued about intent, timing, cruelty, courage. None of them understood what really happened that day. It wasn't revenge. It was interruption. The network recalibrated. It always does, but it never returned to its original shape. Too many eyes were open now. Too many patterns had been seen. That was enough. One evening, long after the noise faded, I received a message from an unknown sender. "They won't forget you." I replied once. "I don't need them to." After that, there were no more messages. No warnings. No offers. Just quiet. And quiet, after everything, was the loudest proof that the story had ended exactly where it needed to. Not with forgiveness. Not with victory. But with control, finally removed from the hands that never deserved it. The night before my wedding had changed the direction of my life. The day of it changed the direction of theirs. And nothing ever went back to the way it was. You have reached the end of the text.